Hey, everybody. Excited to be here today with you. Today, the question is, are you pulling the weeds? So, in a book that I just love, As a Man Thinketh by James Allen, he says, our mind can be likened to a garden. And that garden, right? What happens to a garden? What happens if you don't tend to a garden? Has anybody seen somebody plant a garden or tried to do a garden yourself, right? What do you have to do constantly? You have to pull the weeds. And if you don't pull the weeds, what happens? They just keep growing in there. They keep duplicating in there. So the question is, are you pulling the weeds? Because what's going to happen all the time? Weeds are going to keep falling therein. And you don't want to produce weeds, do you? You want to produce some kind of fruit, some kind of vegetable, right? Some kind of mint, stuff like that. So on your mind, the same thing is happening. Are you pulling the weeds? Let me give you an example, okay? Now this one's a tough one to share just because it shows a side of me that I wasn't proud of at the moment, but it was a weed that I needed to pull for sure. So I went to this fundraiser, and this fundraiser, right at the end, they started, they were going to ask for donations. That's what they do at a fundraiser. Well, I left right when they were asking for donations. So I went, and as I was leaving, I needed to get some gas. So I pulled into a gas station right next door. And when I pulled into that gas station with my little fuel-efficient car, putting gas in, and I am a budget Nazi. I'm all about, discipline and finances and that kind of stuff. And I look at all of these cars that are at this fundraiser. Guess what kind of cars they were? Fancy cars. They were cars that, I don't know what your definition of fancy was, but they were fancy to me. They were nice, extravagant cars. And while I'm putting gas in there, I had a thought. Wasn't a good thought. It was a weed that needed to be pulled. It was this. What a waste. What a waste. Don't they know that if they didn't spend all that money on those cars and waste that money, how much they could help people? The irony of the situation set in very quickly because I was going through a study to help grow my thinking. I was being aware of my thoughts and the weeds that would pop up that would hold me back. And this was one of those thoughts. What a waste. Who were the ones that were in there writing the checks that weren't leaving early when they asked for giving? Who were in there doing what I would love to be doing? It was these folks. And yet I could be judge over them and how they handled their finances. They were doing more than what I was doing. And it was a weed that I needed to pull. I used to see big houses. What a waste. I used to see, the big trucks. They're jacked up and think gas mileage. What a waste. No. So I switched and I pulled the weed. Instead of saying what a waste, I started saying, and for me too. Now, it didn't mean I had to go spend the money in the same way, but I was just acknowledging that there's plenty. There's plenty for me too. There's plenty out there. And I had to work on that as far as my mindset. It's kind of like when the last piece of pie is there on Thanksgiving. Do you have to go get that last piece of pie, or do you know that another pie could be baked, right? And that was a weed that I needed to pull. So here's, again, going back to the question, are you watching the weeds that are being planted inside your mind? And are you pulling the ones that don't serve you? Or do you believe them? And do they keep producing more weeds that hold you where you're at? There's lots of other weeds. The other thought that I want to say here too, what's the only difference between those people who are the most successful and those who are not? What's the only difference? And truly, it's the way they think. In other words, they've pulled a lot of weeds. They've grown their thinking. So that's my encouragement to you today. What weeds are holding you back? What thinking do you need to change? Let me give you just a couple other quick examples. I'm not going to go into stories on them. But I used to think, in order for me to get a bargain, the other person had to lose. Well, I needed to change my thinking. You could have a win-win, and it'd be much better. I've already talked to y'all about this. I used to think leading other people was the most difficult thing. Leading your family, leading your spouse, that was the most difficult. No, I've switched. I've pulled that weed. Who's the hardest person to lead? If I'll lead myself, well, others will follow. Boundaries in relationships. You talk about pulling lots of weeds. I didn't have healthy boundaries. A lot of my clients didn't have healthy boundaries. And one of the thoughts was, and this is just growing your thinking, pulling weeds. If somebody can't accept your no, they do not deserve your yes. If someone cannot accept your no, they do not deserve your yes. Man, it's huge. With some clients, the 80-20 rule, if you've heard of it, or the Pareto principle, man, that concept and pulling some weeds, they used to try and do for everybody or do for all their clients instead of or try to take care of all their priorities instead of focusing on their top 20%. Man, when we work through that, I had one client that went from $300,000 in production when she hired on with me for me to coach her to $500,000 in production in 6 months. And she had been stuck there for over 3.5 years. It's great. Just pulling a weed. She loved all the people that helped her and she wanted to do so much for them, but she wasn't investing in the right, wasn't focusing on the right priorities. Having a vision is another thing that man, if you don't have a vision, or even know what you want. Talk about pulling weeds. A lot of people have a generic idea and they don't get specific on what they want. That's one way that you can start producing the things you want to produce in your life. Just like a garden, you plant the things you want to grow. Well, you have to get clear on what you want and plant those things in your mind. So I hope this has helped. This is my 5th time doing a live with y'all. I'm so excited to be doing this and just sharing some thoughts with you. So remember, your mind is like a garden. Are you tending to the garden? Are you pulling the weeds? Are you growing your thinking to get the results that you want? Here's to tending to the garden and pulling weeds. I will continue pulling weeds, and I hope you do the same.